Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Brisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile. Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to the Christmas edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. Over the next hour, we're going to touch on all the home teams, the New Orleans Saints, the LSU Tigers, the New Orleans Pelicans, and yes, the Tulane Green Wave. We got a great guest tonight, columnist for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, Jeff Duncan joins us tonight on the program. Jeff, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being with us as always. Always appreciate you coming down. As we were talking a little bit before we came on, you're a guy that I can run through all sports with, because obviously you cover all sports with the Picayune in terms of your column, but you guys are doing a really great job at the Picayune right now in terms of diversifying what you guys are doing in the sports office. Talk a little bit about what you guys are involved in.
Well, as I was telling you before we got on air, this is the year-end stuff, so it's a traditionally busy time for us, and we've got a new top 25 list of the most powerful people in Louisiana sports we'll be unveiling on Christmas Day. We'll review our top stories of the year. When, as you know, because we've talked about on your program, big year in New Orleans sports. A lot of sadness in this past year, unfortunately, and also be turning our attention toward the future. While I always have my annual Crystal Ball column, which I picked up from Peter Finney, of course, the late great Peter Finney.
And you've done a great job with it. Growing up in New Orleans, I reached for that paper every single New Year's Day. I used to keep it and go back and look at it 6 months, 8 months after. And I'm sure there are a lot of people are doing the same thing with your column today as I used to do with P. Finish. You've done a great job in carrying that on.
Thanks. And yes, you're right. I mean, people remind me when I'm wrong, as you can imagine.
And look, I never took Pete literally, but you always like to see how close he was.
Right.
And the same thing with yours as well.
And look, when he did it, I remember when I was on the Saints beat, he would call me every year about this time of year and say, well, who the Saints going to draft? Who do you think they're going to draft? And pick your brain. I'm sure I thought he must be doing this with everybody in every beat.
He was incredible, wasn't he?
Yeah, I really miss him, and there'll never be another one like him.
No. And a matter of fact, while we're here, I want to plug P. Finney Jr.'s book. It's Christmas time. You may be looking for a stocking stuffer. That's a great book as well.
Oh my gosh, going back and reading that I just had my column this week on the best Christmas books of the year, and that one's definitely on the list. And if you're a fan of New Orleans sports, I mean, Pete covered it all. 68-year career.
Amazing.
It's incredible.
Amazing. Let's start off talking a little about the Saints, 6-8, a sliver of hope to get into the playoffs. But the big story this week has been the Peyton to Los Angeles rumors. Within the last couple days, rumors that Jacksonville may be jumping in the mix here. Your thoughts on that? Do you buy this? Where do you think it's coming from this year in terms of the splash reports? What's your take on this?
Well, look, it was the same thing that happened last year, and there was some validity to that last year, but ultimately Sean Payton elected to stay, and I think he'll elect to stay this time. I think part of it is just to see what's out there, and I think it's natural. He's been here 11 years. I don't think Sean Payton is putting it out, but I think somebody with his interests in mind is putting it out through back channels just to see what kind of marketability there is for him. You have to create a market if you want to be in it. And I think most people around the league would think he's not available. So this is their way of getting it out there. Ultimately, I don't think he will leave. The one exception would be potentially L.A. There's a lot of attractiveness to that job. You have a deep-pocketed owner. You have a young quarterback. You have a lot of cap room, and you have an incredible defense.
Yes.
That he could turn that thing around quickly. I think that would be a strong appeal to him. It'd be a market where I think he could go and be very high profile and have a chance to win. But he wouldn't have the autonomy he has here. And I know whatever and whenever Sean Payton elects to leave, he's not going to go anywhere that he doesn't think he can win, and he has a lot of control. And so those are, I think, the deciding factors.
I couldn't agree with you more. To me, it's about control. Wherever he goes, he has to have the same type of control he has here in New Orleans, which means he runs the franchise on the
Definitely.
football side for that matter. I do agree about how intriguing it is as well. I mean, you got the young quarterback, deep pocket owner. You're in Los Angeles. His daughter is at Pepperdine.
Right.
You look at that market. The defense, I agree. Again, that's a defense that's ready-made. You don't have to tinker with that team too much. And with his offense to be able to maybe get that thing going. But the question always is, at what cost? He's the highest paid coach in the NFL right now, making about a little bit of almost $9 million a year. Just signed an extension. We had the love letter to New Orleans at the end of last season. There was a lot of rumors out there last year that San Francisco was a real player in the Payton sweepstakes, but it ultimately didn't want to give up the draft choices that were necessary to bring him on board. The splash report was the Saints may want to take less this year than maybe they were looking last year. Do you buy that? Do you think that Mickey Loomis, looking at the landscape of where the Saints are right now, would be willing to take a bargain basement rate for Sean Payton going to Los Angeles?
Well, that was an interesting part of that report that I don't doubt the validity of that report at all. It came from Jason Lockenfor, who's very wired into the agent community nationally. And there's been some talk, I think, internally that maybe, and we've talked about on your program, maybe Mickey Loomis goes up to a president's type role. They move Jeff Ireland into the GM position, and they could do some restructuring here. Look, they're going through an organizational transition right now in ownership. There's no doubt. When's the last time anyone heard from Tom Benson in any matter other than a press release statement?
True.
So clearly ownership is going through a transition, and that could be in the back of Sean Payton's mind. Does he want to go through this transition right now? And a guy like Sean Payton isn't thinking this year or next year. He's thinking 5 years down the road. What's the long-term viability of wherever he's going to be coaching? And I think that could be also playing into this. Not necessarily. I think the team could be on the right track, could have another good year next year and get back in the playoff hunt. I think he's thinking much further down the road, and with Drew Brees turning 38 and with the contract situation after he's not under contract after next year, does he think maybe this is the time to get out before things start going down?
Once again, I agree 100%. The longevity of Drew Brees, knowing that this was really basically a 2-year deal, and next year will be the last year, also has to come into play as well. Last year, some talks about Payton retreads, maybe coming in, being the head coach. A lot of people are saying that the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints, if Payton chooses to leave, is already on that staff with Dennis Allen. Do you buy that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think he could be a strong candidate because they already know him. They're comfortable with him. Mickey Loomis would want somebody that he's comfortable with. So I think he would be a strong candidate. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know if they'd want to open it up. But look, they've done it in the past. I mean, when Randy Mueller was let go, they hired Mickey Loomis 3 days later to be the general manager, and he's still the GM there. Yes. That's the MO of this organization. And he's done a good job with this defense. He's been a head coach. He would be somebody I think they'd take a long look at.
What's your gut? You believe Payton stays or goes?
I think he stays because I think he wants to see this thing through. I think what he said last year wasn't a hoax. I think he meant what he said, and I think he feels good about this team going forward. I know everybody is upset right now with the record. They're 6-8. They're not going to make the playoffs for the third year. They have a chance to be one of only 10 teams in the league to not make the playoffs 3 years in a row. But they've been a lot closer this year. Their defense is much more competitive. And offensively, they're showing potential, like we saw against the Cardinals, against the Rams, of getting back to that dominant unit. So I think there's a part of him that wants to at least give it one more run here and reward the fans because they've been through a tough period here.
Yes. Let's talk about Payton's coaching job this year. Up until the game against Detroit and Tampa Bay, two teams that were familiar with the Saints. And remember, Detroit has played the Saints the last 3 seasons. Lombardi was once on that staff. From an offensive standpoint, they probably have a concept of what they're doing offensively. You look at Tampa Bay, they play them each and every season, twice a year. There are no secrets with teams that are within your division. You know those teams very well. But up until those two games, I thought this was one of Peyton's finest coaching jobs. I don't think this is a very talented team, but yet I thought he squeezed the most out of the talent that he had this year. Maybe that took a little bit of a dip in those last two games. Maybe I will judge him in its entirety after the last two games of the season. But up until that point, I really thought he was doing a great job coaching this team up. What are your thoughts on how he's done this year?
I would agree. I told somebody just a week or so ago that I think it's been one of his best jobs. Look, they've had to patchwork that entire defense all year long. The secondary they were playing with against the Cardinals on Sunday, I mean, there was one starter in the lineup. I mean, their corners were guys that weren't even on the team when the season started. Their starting corners, B.W. Webb, Sterling Moore, and they've done a good job of patching in that defense and treading water, and they've been competitive in almost every game this year. I mean, they've really been in the fourth quarter of almost every game. You're right, they're not that talented. I think offensively they've got a lot of talent. But remember the offensive line, I know we were on the program earlier in the year in training camp. It looked like a big weakness. And they patched that thing together, and at least it held up.
Yes.
So there's reason for encouragement, but it's also pretty tenuous. They haven't had an injury to Drew Brees. I mean, if something like this happens, they're really in a precarious position at backup quarterback and some other spots where, yes, they are maybe close to turning the corner, but they're also close to bottoming out.
Yes.
And they're not built for the long haul right now. And so I think all those things factor into, can they put one more really good offseason together? Right. That's what they need to do. This offseason coming up has to be as good as last offseason.
Yeah, and that's a byproduct in a lot of cases of the mistakes that's been made in free agency, missed drafts, and then having to turn this roster over like we've seen over the last 3 years. Good teams, and during the Peyton era when the teams were good, you didn't have that roster turnover that you've had over the last 3 seasons.
No, there's no doubt about it. And the depth is, when you go back and just look at the drafts from about 2010 to 2014, I mean, there's hardly anything left. And I think there was some research in the Buffalo News. I read a story the other day that comparing the Buffalo situation, and the Saints were one of the only teams in the league with fewer draft picks on their active roster than the Buffalo Bills. The Saints were the lowest and the second lowest in the league with draft picks. So you can't overcome that. You can't fill it in with free agency. We've seen the mistakes over and over. Guys like Brandon Browner and Jarris Byrd and even Coby Fleener to some degree.
Yes.
You've got to build through the draft. I think they've learned that lesson, but the problem is they were spinning the wheels for about 3 years learning it.
Yeah, and again, in the NFL, it's going to catch up with you. You know, if you mismanage the cap, it's going to catch up with you. If you're not proficient in bringing in free agents that make an impact, it'll catch up with you. And it definitely, the lifeblood of any franchise, the draft. If you're not drafting consistently, restocking that cupboard, well, it's going to catch up with you in the long run.
Well, and especially, Eric, when you have a franchise quarterback and you're paying him franchise money.
Great
you
point.
have to build through the draft because just for the cost benefits of it. We see that. That's exactly what goes on in Green Bay. I mean, they hardly ever sign even any free agents, Julius Peppers being one of the few. Otherwise, they build around Aaron Rodgers. The Saints have elected to kind of do a little bit of both, and it hasn't really worked.
Saints personnel department has been much maligned over the last few years, and rightly so when you look at the bust we've been talking about. But this year, probably the best draft class we've seen since 2006. You look at what the pro personnel department has been able to do in terms of the free agent class, a free agent class that they didn't spend a lot of money on because they didn't have a lot of money. Maybe Coby Fleener, the guy they spent the most money on, you might say maybe hasn't lived up to expectations. But across the board, the free agents for the most part have panned out. Obviously, Laurinaitis was at the end of his career. That was kind of a roll of the dice anyway. Yeah. And then what they've been able to do in season, patching holes, bringing guys off the street, especially in the secondary, to be able to fill holes. This might be in recent times the best this personnel department on the pro side and the college side have done in a long time.
Well, let's go down the list. I mean, Nick Fairley's playing almost at a Pro Bowl level. He's going to earn a big payday, and I'm sure the Saints are going to want him back at a certain price. But Craig Robertson, the leading tackler, I don't think anybody knew who Craig Robertson was when he signed with the Saints.
True.
Laurinaitis was the big linebacker acquisition. John Kuhn at fullback, another quality pickup that I think was totally under the radar.
Nate Stupar.
And then look at all these young corners that they brought in, B.W. Webb and Sterling Moore. I mean, Sterling Moore is a solid NFL player. And then the draft, I think, when you look at Von Bell, Mike Thomas, and Sheldon Rankins, I mean, you got three keepers, three core players that are going to be starters. I mean, they're already starters.
True.
They're going to build around for the future. So this is clearly the best offseason they've had. They needed it. They were desperately in desperate shapes, especially after this 2015 draft class has not quite been what we thought it was. I mean, Pete has come around. He's playing okay, but Stephon Anthony's really struggled.
Yes.
And after that, I mean, you got Tyler Davison, but the corners are both lost. Damian Swann and P.J. Williams, we don't know what we've got with those guys.
That's true.
So they needed a big-time offseason, and they got it. Now they've got to follow it up.
Right. It'll be interesting to see how some of those injured guys come back. A lot of people are thinking, like you mentioned, Williams, some of the other guys, they'll come back and contribute at a high level next year when they're healthy.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The guy I'm worried about is Delvin Breaux. He hasn't looked like the same player this year. He's been banged up all year long. And that position concerns me, Eric, when you start having these kind of recurring injuries that happened with Keenan Lewis. Now, he was an older player, but, Delvin Breaux's an older player to some degree. He's not a rookie.
Right.
So I'm a little worried about him. I'm sure the Saints are worried. I think corner remains a priority for this team. I think they can't rely because they have too many question marks at every other spot. They have really no true lockdown guy. And if you watch that Lions game, the Lions were picking on Delvin Breaux. They were going after him.
Right.
I don't recall too many teams doing that last year.
Dennis Allen, critique his coaching job. I think he's done a fantastic job this season, considering how patchwork this defense has been.
Yeah, well, you know what was clearly what's apparent in the games now is the front seven is solid. I mean, it's not dominant, but it's very solid. I mean, look against Arizona, David Johnson, they held him in check. Against Tampa Bay, they were able to get pressure on Jameis Winston enough to where they were limiting them to like field goals. They've been very good in the red zone this year. I think that's a lot by design, by scheme. They don't have a dominant edge rusher. That's something else they need. They've needed for a long time. But when you start looking at Nick Fairley, Sheldon Rankins, and Cam Jordan, you've got 3 first-round draft picks there. So you've got more talent there than they've had in the past. And then the 2 linebackers, now that Ellerbe is back, along with Robertson, that front seven's solid.
Yes.
Not dominant, but solid. And the back end is just trying to tread water with there's so many injuries and the suspension of Vaccaro.
True. Do you anticipate any coaching changes? Greg McMahon on the hot seat a little bit about the way the special teams have played, having to bring in a coach to help in midseason. When you look at the landscape of guys that have been there a long time, that have been the fans and the media, myself included, been critical of in the past, do you anticipate changes? Now, Sean Payton, he's loyal to his guys.
Right.
Okay. Do you anticipate any changes?
Well, I'm sure there'll be changes because there almost always is in the NFL, but I don't know if it'll be a firing. That'll kind of surprise me, to be honest with you, just because I know Payton is stuck by Greg McMahon. Greg McMahon has a very good reputation around the NFL as a special teams coach. It hasn't played out that way sometimes here, but they have done a lot of work even in the second half of the season, bringing in players, linebackers, safeties, the bottom of the roster to try and help special teams coverage. It hadn't worked out that well. So if there is a spot that is changed, that's the one I think everybody anticipates and we'll be watching.
I'm not taking up for Greg McMahon here, but when you turn the roster over as much as you've had to, when you're bringing in undrafted free agents, when you're trying to fill holes on this roster with again, that level of player, your special teams will suffer.
Well, look, they've got 16 players on either the suspension or injury list. And I got about half. I was looking right before I came tonight. I was about halfway through the NFL. That's the highest in the entire NFL. No one has that many players so far. So, look, that's overlooked a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, in this criticism that we've had in the 6-8 mark, I mean, a lot of defensive players, a lot of secondary guys that they've had to kind of fill in for, and those are the guys that are on teams.
Yes. Anticipate any front office changes? You mentioned them before. We've talked about Mickey Loomis, again, double duty with the Pelicans and the Saints. Do you anticipate maybe kicking him up to maybe a president of both clubs, maybe a true general manager that comes in and has the ability to be able to get involved in pro personnel, college personnel on the football side, maybe some possible change. We'll get into this a little bit later with Demps on the basketball side. On the football side, do you anticipate any front office changes?
Well, what I think could happen, you mentioned it, is Mickey Loomis moving up more into an overseeing type role because of what's going on with ownership. Tom Benson's 89. He'll be 90 in July. He is not as hands-on as anybody would be at that age. and they'll be bringing in Gail Benson to more of a hands-on approach as ownership, and she's going to need someone like a Mickey Loomis and a Dennis Lauscha, I think, in a consulting type position, and it's going to take away from Mickey being in the day-to-day operations. So I think that would precipitate him moving upstairs, and then the vacuum is created, and it's going to be filled in. I could see that happening. I think there's a need for that, and I think with what we've seen with the Pelicans, the fact that they're struggling again, and they could be making some changes. I don't know yet, but they could.
Yes, sure.
I think we all anticipate that could happen. Then it's going to even put more of a premium on Mickey Loomis finding somebody to run the basketball side.
When you look at last week's outburst on the sidelines with Mark Ingram, how do you take that? And if you would kind of morph into the Twitter tirade of Brandon Cooks. See, you're in the locker room. You know these guys. You see these guys away from the field. I kind of think that with today's athlete, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of me instead of team. I think we see that. I think there's a lot of pressure on the young athlete with social media, trying to get themselves out on that platform. You look at a Sports Center, which again they've grown up with their entire lives, wanting to be on the highlights. Okay, you're not getting a highlight if you get 79 yards and you don't score, but if you score, you're on the highlights. Incentives, which again is a real big part of how contracts are structured right now. It almost, in some cases, makes the player, today's player, worry more about, in some cases, me than the team. In football, in my opinion, it's got to be a team game. In order for Ingram to be able to get yards and score, the offensive line's got to be able to block for him. For Brandon Cooks to catch a pass, the line has to block, and Breeze has to complete the pass. So it's truly a team game. It's not tennis or golf. What's your take on both of those outbursts, the Twitter tirade, and then of course the outburst on the sideline?
Well, look, the Mark Ingram thing was bizarre. I mean, that just came out of nowhere to me, and he's one of the most liked players on the team. He's one of the young leaders. I'd say the young leadership core, once you get past Drew Brees, is Cam Jordan, Mark Ingram, and Kenny Vaccaro. Those guys are all about the same age. They were all first-round draft picks. They've kind of been anointed. They're on second contracts as the leaders. So for him to make that kind of scene on the sidelines certainly was out of character. And I think, look, he's a competitive guy, and I think he was just frustrated. I think these are the things that happen when the team's not winning. I think if there were 10 wins right now, I don't think Brandon Cooks would be saying, I need to make a business decision. And I don't think Mark Ingram would be so upset. But when you preach team and you preach sacrifice and when you preach being unselfish and it doesn't pay off with wins and success and going to the Pro Bowl and all these other things, it's very difficult, I think, to keep people on that same page. And I think that was born out of frustration.
In the past, we've seen Peyton jettison those type of players. These are two number one picks. These are guys that are big parts of the offense. And these guys have grown into their positions now. A lot of time has been put into both guys to allow them to really flourish within this offense. Do you anticipate any changes, or just a situation of growing pains here?
Yeah, no, I would be surprised. I mean, I wouldn't put it past. I mean, it's not beyond a shadow of a doubt they could trade either one of them, especially Cooks, because he's coming up towards the end of his contract. That's the time you trade a player like him. And they feel, I think, that they can always find a receiver. They can always find a running back.
Just one got Fuller from Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, and look at how they've done it in the past. I mean, they traded Darren Sproles, they traded Jimmy Graham, they traded Reggie Bush. They traded some great perimeter players, and the offense has kept rolling. And I think they would keep rolling with they lost Brandon Cooks. And there would be some market value for Brandon Cooks. So I could see something like that potentially happening, but I don't think it would be born out of he's a cancer or a problem in the locker room. I don't perceive either one of those as that big a deal. But look, we're in the 24/7 coverage era,
right.
and it becomes something, and they had to address it internally, no doubt.
No doubt. Pro Bowl snub, second year in a row. Your thoughts on that? Brees was having a great year, and Cam Jordan, I mean, again, I think most players in the league respect him for what he does. He's not a one-dimensional defensive end.
No, he doesn't have the sack numbers, and that's what hurts him right now. I think 6.5 sacks is not going to measure up to the competition. But when you start looking at the team, the only guy that I think you could make a case for that made it over Cam Jordan is Michael Bennett. He has such a great reputation, very similar to Cam Jordan. He plays the run. He's a very solid all-around defensive end, and he plays on one of the best defenses in the league and a team that's winning. So it was very hard to say that he deserves it, but hard to say he deserved it over anybody that made the team. Breeze, I think, clearly was snubbed. I mean, Dak Prescott's had a wonderful year, but Dak Prescott, if you take Drew Brees and put him on the Cowboys, they've got the same record, or maybe even better.
Yeah.
So come on, I mean, it's not all about winning. You can't fault Drew Brees. That one kind of still surprises me. I mean, he's had such a remarkable year. His numbers are off the charts. And other than that, I mean, I think those are the only two you could really say deserve it. I mean, John Kuhn's had a good year at fullback, Thomas Morstead, but the people that made it ahead of them, I think, have outshined them.
You know, I mused that on the radio show today that, you know, right around the time of the voting is when you saw Brees throw the back-to-back games, 6 picks, no touchdowns. Yeah. And that might have been more fresh in the minds of the players that were voting, the people that were voting on this, than maybe, you know, the great year that he's having and leading the league in almost every category.
Yeah, you know, and I remember Sean Payton saying, and I think he's right, spot on this, that the Pro Bowl is something of a popularity contest, and you tend to go a year deserving to make the team and not making it early in your career, and then it turns around on the back end of your career, you make it a year when you don't deserve it. Sure. So it kind of, you get paid back in the end. And that's kind of like a guy like Michael Bennett this year has not had a great year. He's been in and out of the lineup. He makes the team on his reputation when he probably didn't deserve it. So those things kind of come around.
I found an interesting story recently about Teron Armstead. He goes on IR. One of the things that Peyton had said in his press conference was that they felt that rest would be enough for him to be able to get through this and to heal up. It's been 2 years back-to-back with the leg injuries. You can't discount the toughness of Armstead playing basically on one leg for the last 2 years. I've been very vocal about the medical staff that's dealing with both the Pelicans and the Saints. I just wonder if ultimately Armstead should be going to 1 or 2, 3 specialists to be able to check out that leg to make sure he's going to be ready to go for next year, because they need him at 100%.
I mean, he's arguably the second or third most indispensable player, an important player on the roster after Brees. And, you know, it's funny. I remember this offseason sitting with Willie Rowe for an event I was at and asked him what his thoughts were on Teron Armstead, because he was such a rising, ascending player at the time. And he talked about his incredible athleticism, his diligent study habits. He said he's just got to stay healthy. And I remember that stuck in the back of my mind, because at the time he wasn't hurt. He was, you know, supposedly healed up.
Yes.
So Willie might have known something about him, and it's played out again for a second season in a row. And you could see the last couple of weeks, I mean, he's not effective. No. He's just toughing it out. And if he can't get over this is some kind of chronic condition, then they're going to have to think about getting another tackle, because right now, if you move Pete out, let's face it, Zach Strief can't keep playing forever. It's 11 years. Yes. They're going to have to address the offensive line one way or the other in the draft for depth, if nothing else. Well,
I agree. Look, you got lucky in bringing Jari Evans back. Strief's had another good year, but both those guys are 11 years in the league. You know, you're rolling the dice to say that they're going to come back next year and be able to play at the type of level they played this year. You've got to do something to hedge that off going forward.
Yeah, look, well, the entire offense is built on timing and protection. Once any of that gets broken down, none of it works. And that's what happened against Detroit, and that's what happened against Tampa Bay. It all comes down to Brees getting it out quick, Brees making his quick read, and if the players can't get off the line of scrimmage at receiver, all these things are synchronized. And so far, it's worked pretty well this year. They're leading the league again in offense. But we've seen from time to time, like Tampa does, when they can't protect, you know, it's not a very good offense. And so I think they'll address it. It's just a matter of how soon they address it, or do they go in free agency and address it.
Well, they'll have some money this year. That's for the first time in the last few years. They can have money. Hopefully they've learned their lesson on how to spend that money wisely. Again, this past free agency period, they did a great job with not a lot of money in filling some holes with the team. 2 games left. They need both games to be in the playoffs, and a lot of help. Going against 2 teams, as I mentioned earlier, man, they know each other backwards and forwards. You're not going to pull anything on Tampa Bay or Atlanta that they have not already seen. They know the offense, they know the defense, and the Saints know them. How do you think that this season turns out?
Well, I'd be really interested to see what kind of attendance shows up for the game. We're talking a late game on Christmas Eve. Again, you know, you're kind of out of it. They're going to need a home field advantage in this game, because they're facing a desperate Tampa team that's now a game back of Atlanta in the division. They just lost to Dallas. So they're going to give Tampa Bay's best shot. And this is a team that's already beaten them. So I think it's going to be a fascinating game. Then they're going to have to go to Atlanta. And, you know, look, it's possible for the Saints to win both these games, because Atlanta might not need that last game.
True.
And if they eliminate Tampa here on Saturday, all of a sudden, they've got a shot to win out and finish 8-8, and then you've got progress, winning 3 in a row to end the season. So a lot could go either way here. They could also very easily lose both of them. Look, Atlanta's playing on another level right now. Their defense has turned it up. Guy we've talked about before, Vic Beasley, leads the league in sacks.
Yeah.
That's what the Saints need. They need a Vic Beasley. They need a guy off the edge to complement Cam Jordan. They're not easy to find. They had to get him in the top 10 in the draft. But if there's one there, and this is a good year in the draft, Eric, I mean, you've got Barnett from Tennessee. Myles Garrett's probably going to go number 1 from A&M. But there's a lot of guys like that in this draft. They've got to go get him.
Yes.
I don't care if they have to use another pick. Go get that guy, because everything else I think you can live with later in the draft. But you can't find those guys in the 3rd, 4th round.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And sadly, Jeff, I think they're going to have a tough time filling the Dome on Saturday, Christmas Eve.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is not a situation where the Saints are rolling and people can't wait to get to the game. And look, I'm telling you right now, over 10,000 tickets on the ticket exchange right now. I can tell you for my own season tickets, I'm doing stuff with my family. I can't give them away. So it's going to be very tough. I think a lot of people are going to choose to sit this one out. Maybe not in protest of the season, but just, the fact the NFL moved this, it was unanticipated for a lot of people that have family gatherings for Christmas Eve.
Yeah, they're going to watch the game on TV at home.
There's no
and
doubt.
Have some eggnog.
Exactly.
And sit around with the family and watch it. And that's the concern. And so, look, I was encouraged by the way the Saints competed at Arizona.
As was I.
They played hard. They played with some spirit and some fight, as did Arizona. And I think that's an encouraging sign. This coaching staff has done this 2 years in a row, where the team's kind of been out of it, and the team has still played hard. That's a credit to Sean Payton, and the message has not gotten stale with the players.
Right. Well, and it shouldn't, though, is it? Should it?
Well, you see it around the league, though.
Right.
Sometimes.
But the turnover you see in this roster, there's only a few players left over from that championship team. And a lot of these players, in some cases, are journeymen. And if they're not playing at their top level, there's a chance that this roster could be turned over once again at the end of the season. So they're playing for jobs here and elsewhere.
But look at what we saw from the New York Jets the other night.
Agreed.
I mean, that was just a complete tank job. We haven't seen that under Sean Payton. And that's something that I think sometimes gets taken for granted. We saw that sometimes under Jim Haslett and his tenure. So we'll see how this game plays out on Sunday, like a Saturday. Like I said, Tampa, I'm more interested to see what Tampa team shows up.
Yeah.
Are they really there yet? I thought they competed well against Dallas. Can they turn around in 2 weeks after beating the Saints and beat them again? Yeah. That will impress me if they can do that.
Jeff Duncan is our guest on the Christmas edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Amco Fence, locally owned and operated since 1976. Fully licensed and insured and a member of the BBB, Amco serves both residential and commercial customers. If you're looking to repair, replace, or install a fence for security or aesthetic reasons, Amco Fence supplies wooden, metal, chain link, vinyl, and ornamental or automatic gates. Amco aims to satisfy your fencing needs. Amco Fence, 504-468-9559 or AmcoFenceCompany.com.
TikTok Cafe, located on Causeway South at the I-10 in Metairie, is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our menu offers breakfast dishes like our Western omelet made from scratch biscuits, grits, egg sunny side up, and lunch specials like our homemade cheeseburgers with a side of golden brown fries. Don't forget about our weekday lunch special, and that every Tuesday is steak night. TikTok Cafe, open 24/7 at Causeway South at the I-10 in Metairie.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Jeff Duncan, columnist for New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com is our guest tonight. Jeff, let's talk a little bit about the LSU Tigers. A lot of people felt that Lane Kiffin kind of backtracked on LSU when he took the Florida Atlantic job, especially when he didn't get one of the Houston job, that a lot of people felt that there was a behind-the-scenes promise to Coach Orgeron that he would come to LSU. I think it's kind of a blessing in disguise, though. With Kiffin, you were always going to have him looking for the next job, trying to get a head coaching job. With Matt Canada, I think you have a guy that will be here 2 to 3 years, maybe longer, maybe use this as a stepping stone down the line. But I don't think immediately his eye is going to be on looking for another job. His eyes will be on trying to make this offense the best it can be. What's your take on the Kiffin-Canada situation in terms of offensive coordinator?
I agree with you. I think it's worked out perfectly for LSU and for Coach Orgeron. I never felt like it was the done deal that everybody was making it out to be. I'd actually heard that they weren't as close as everybody made them out to be, that being Ed Orgeron and Lane Kiffin. I think they were still friendly, but I don't think they were best buddies by any means. And I don't think he ever felt like this was a done deal. I think he always knew that if something better head coaching-wise came down the road, that's what Lane Kiffin wanted to do. So I think it's worked out very well. Canada's resume is sparkling. He comes in with incredible track record of developing quarterbacks. He's immediately paid dividends on the recruiting trail, locking up both of the quarterback commitments that were kind of wavering. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do with this offense. I mean, it's going to be night and day compared to what they did under Les Miles.
Thank goodness.
And Cam Cameron. And I think it's excited some of the offensive staff. What's going to be interesting to see coming up is who stays and who doesn't stay on the coaching staff after the bowl game, because I think there's going to be some movement like you would expect with a new head coach.
Yeah, I would agree. Bobby April, rumored to be at least a consultant now with the special teams, maybe taking on that role down the line. Obviously, he's got great pedigree with his time in the NFL, and of course, well known here in South Louisiana.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that's coached special teams as well as anybody in the NFL level for decades, and is highly respected even today. Still continuing to coach. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I know Coach O knows him, and whatever role he has, it's only going to help. And that's a position that they need help at. I wouldn't be surprised if they also make some changes on the offensive line. I think that's an area that's needed upgrading, whether that's just coaching or talent evaluation. There's something missing there, and we see it every year when they play Alabama.
Absolutely. I haven't had an opportunity to speak to you here on this show about the hiring of Coach Orgeron and the process that was taken. What's your take on the way that Oliva handled the process and ultimately Coach O taking the reins?
Well, the only really fault I have with the entire process is if Jimbo Fisher was your number one candidate, you either should have had him locked up a long time ago, and it never should have gotten to the very end and get turned down. I mean, that's something you take care of through back channels, and you find out if he's interested or not. There's no reason to let it get that far. And I've heard people say he had some family situation. He wants to be with his son. I think his son has some issues, and so he wanted to be there. Well, I mean, that should have been discovered a week after you made the change with Coach Miles.
Right.
So it never should have gotten to that point. Now, the Tom Herman thing, I have no fault at all. That was a guy that I championed for the job, and I think they went hard for him, and they got unlucky. The one job that you're going to lose him to opened up at the same time. And then I think they ended up doing what probably was the right thing. Coach Orgeron is a better fit for LSU than any other job in the country. He's not a great fit at Boston College or Stanford or Washington. He's a great fit at LSU, and so it made a lot of sense. Now let's see what he does with it now that he is the head coach. He's going to have some rope. He's going to have some leverage now. What kind of staff's he going to put together? I like the Matt Canada hire, and he's able to keep Dave Aranda on. He's got 2 quality coordinators, and those are the guys that put together the game plan every week. And Ed Orgeron is now going to have to hit the recruiting trail and stop this leakage and exodus of top talent to Alabama, because right now Nick Saban is coming in here and picking off some of the best players.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Good news this week, Miles Brennan is going to committed to LSU. Narcisse is also coming back, committed to LSU. But, you know, they lost, as you mentioned, Isaiah Buggs to Alabama.
And that was Coach O's a personal recruit, a guy he's recruited for years.
Yes.
And you lose him out of state. I mean, he's a Louisiana kid. That's a big loss. And they've got to stop that right now. That's what Coach O, one of the reasons he was hired.
Agreed.
Let's face it, his connections in Louisiana circles. And I haven't talked to a high school coach in Louisiana that isn't elated about the hire. So
I agree.
It should pay off.
And of course, I guess a lot is going to depend on his success from his recruiting prowess, which again, was what he was hired for. But do you think that he will change? Do you think he will continue to be the CEO of the program? I think that to his detriment, if he, again, now that it's his program and, you know, he's the guy that's on the line, ultimately will be fired or given an extension down the line on how well this program progresses. Do you think that he'll be a guy that'll medal on a Saturday night, or do you think he'll be the CEO that we saw on the sidelines as he was an interim?
We're going to find out. I don't know. I think that's the question everybody has. And look, this team that he took over was a very talented team. We're going to find that out in April and May when the NFL draft comes around, because there's going to be a lot of LSU Tigers go in the first, second, third round.
Yes.
And it's going to be different next year. They're going to be in a transition year. I think offensively they've got some pieces, but they're going to have to replace a lot on defense. We're going to see how he handles adversity, because he hasn't really had any yet. The Florida game is probably the most adversity he's encountered, but he's going to reach a stretch, and he's going to be able to maintain the delegatory role that he's maintained so far. Yes. That's what got him in trouble at Ole Miss, and he says he's learned from it, but we're going to find out.
Leonard Fournette finishes his career, obviously not the career that maybe he thought he was going to have. Everyone had pegged him, myself included, as at least a one-time Heisman Trophy winner. That kind of got robbed from him this year in terms of injuries, but doesn't show up to the team banquet and has decided to forego going to playing in the Citrus Bowl. I understand the injury and the Citrus Bowl. I don't understand not showing up to the banquet. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Leonard Fournette has had one foot toward the NFL since the season began. Frankly, I think because of the system, he has to play college football. I think he was a prime example of a guy that should have been able to leave early. He was one of the few people physically ready to play in the NFL a year or two. He might have been able to play right out of high school. He was just a freak athlete, and I think he's always been thinking about that and being very conscious of staying healthy and seeing what happened last year with Jalen Smith and Miles Jack. I think it was a legitimate concern for him, because he knows what his eye is and what his dream is to play in the NFL. I'm a little hesitant to criticize him for the team banquet thing, because I don't know enough about what happened. I don't know if he was locking up the agent because he signed with Jay-Z's Rock Nation.
Right.
I don't know if that was preventing him, if he was having to do that business. Seemed like he could maybe work that around it.
Right.
That's not going anywhere.
Because that date was already set.
Yeah, and that's not going anywhere. I mean, you can sign anytime. So that's a little disappointing, but I would like to know more about it before I criticize him. But I'm with you. That's the one thing that I think the team, and he's been such a great teammate.
Great team player.
And all of his teammates revere him for his leadership skills. I'm willing to give him a pass because he's never shown that selfish attitude in the past.
Great player, and again, everyone would have wished him to get a Heisman Trophy, but you got to be happy that he chose LSU. And look, he's been a great player on and off the field for the Tigers.
His legacy is intact.
Yes,
and
agreed.
He's going to be one of these guys that we look back on some of the games he had, some of the plays he had will live, and he set history. He made history, and he didn't disappoint in any way. And look, he stayed home. He could have gone anywhere in the country. He was the number one player in the country. Could have gone to Alabama, like so many players have done.
Yes.
And I think he enjoyed every minute of it. I remember distinctly seeing him at LSU basketball games up in the student section, cheering. I think he enjoyed all of being a college student, and I look forward to seeing how he does at the NFL. I think he's going to be a tremendous NFL player.
So do I. You know a lot about the two teams in the Citrus Bowl, obviously being a Louisville native and knowing a lot about LSU. Talk about this matchup.
Well, I'm curious to see what Louisville team shows up. I mean, they seem to have almost been a team that peaked early in the year. Really disappointing finish to their season, which is uncharacteristic of Bobby Petrino teams. And I'm fascinated to see Petrino's offense against Dave Aranda's defense. I think LSU has the athletes, if anybody does, to corral Lamar Jackson and keep him kind of intact, and a team that can run with Lamar Jackson. He's one of the most incredible athletes I've ever seen with the football.
Agreed.
The fastest runner I've ever seen at quarterback. And I think LSU will have a great plan. And if they don't turn the ball over, I think LSU is going to have the upper hand, because Louisville's defense at the end of the year, they just got gashed by Kentucky. They could not stop Kentucky on the ground or through the air, and they got gashed by Houston. So those were troubling times. I know they had a bunch of injuries, and those guys should be back. So it's going to be fun to see this matchup. I mean, you got really two good coaching staffs going at it.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best matchups of the bowl season. I really do.
Yeah, it's going to be intriguing, I think, for a lot of different storylines. I mean, I think Petrino will have Louisville ready. That was a bitterly disappointing loss they had to Kentucky. So they'll be ready, and it's a matter of where is LSU at? You got so many guys that are weighing their options to go to the NFL, and that plays into it sometimes. I mean, Nick Saban's talked about it. Will they be ready? I can remember a few years ago when LSU played Iowa, and they just kind of sleepwalked through that game and lost at the very end. That was a team that looked like it had checked out in the season. I'll be surprised if that happens. Coach O's That's one of the things. He's been able to motivate this team all year long. I think they'll be ready to play, but I do think how Louisville plays offensively will determine how this game plays out.
Tough season for Tulane, 4-8. For a while there, it looked like they may get to be bowl eligible. Didn't happen. But Coach Willie Fritz has kind of hit the ground running here. Hit the recruiting trail. He's lost some players that have decommitted to him. He's got to put a plug in that, obviously. But he's added 3 JUCO players. Jonathan Banks, a quarterback, offensive lineman Dominique Briggs, wide receiver Jabril Cluis. The big one to me is Jonathan Banks, who looks like he can come in, from what I've read, and really run this type of offense that Willie Fritz has. It wasn't so far in the distant past where Tulane wasn't recruiting junior college players. A lot of coaches have complained about that, from the baseball team, the basketball, to football. What happened there? Was that part of bringing in Willie Fritz? Is that the new Troy Dannon, the new athletic director, realizing that they're going to have to have opportunities for JUCO players to come in and help their programs?
Well, I think the entire university had to make that call. The university management and
absolutely,
the administration had to sign off on that. And look, I think when they decided to go to the American Athletic Conference, they realized, they've got to be able to compete at that level. It's a different level. It's arguably the 6th best conference in college football. And Tulane's going to have some type of system in place to allow them to get some athletes to compete, because they really are an outlier in that conference. When you start comparing them to Houston and Memphis and Central Florida, these are big public universities, sprawling universities that have the ability to bring in junior college players. So I think they can handpick some of these players. I don't think there's something they're going to stock their roster with. But, for instance, going and get a player like the quarterback you mentioned, Banks, he started out at Kansas State, so he's a little bit different prospect than you would normally have. And let's face it, he's going to be the starter next year. They're signing him to be the starter. And that's the position that Willie Fritz has got to fix. This year, this team, if they had a decent quarterback, I think could have been much more competitive. They were competitive anyway with that defense they had, but they need to get that quarterback system, because it's the key to his whole offense.
Talk about, well, first of all, Willie Fritz, from what I understand, from talking to people who are involved in recruiting, has really done really well in acclimating himself to Louisiana high school football, getting out and meeting the coaches, something that he really couldn't do when he took the job last year, because it was so late in the process.
And there's so many players here in this state. It's remarkable. I just was looking at a list of the top freshmen in the country, and there's a kid from Landry Walker at Kansas who's one of the top 10 freshmen in the country, and another player at another school from somewhere in Baton Rouge at Texas A&M that was a lightly recruited player. There's guys like that Tulane can get, because LSU's not going to get them all. Those are the guys they've got to get. Tanzil Smart's a perfect example. When Curtis Johnson recruited him, this is a guy that's going to be a 3rd or 4th round NFL draft pick, a guy that the Saints could use, frankly. Those players are all over the state, and yes, plenty of them can get into Tulane. But look, it's a tough job, because more and more competition's coming into this state. Texas A&M, all the SEC West schools recruited hard now, but there's a place for Tulane. I think Fritz knows exactly the kind of player that fits his system. So a guy that can be successful at Tulane might be a guy that some of these other schools overlook.
Yes. What about the athletic program as a whole? Since Troy Dannon has taken over, he's made some changes on the coaching staff. Some he had to make, some he made on his own. There was a flirtation with the Big 12. A lot of people felt that Tulane had a legitimate chance to get into the Big 12 if they expanded to 4 teams. They desperately want to get into a Power 5 conference. What do you think happens in the future for Tulane?
Well, that would be incredible if they did. It would vault their program to a whole nother level. Now, they don't want to be the Vanderbilt of the Big 12. They've got to be competitive. They've got to be successful. And I think what Troy Dannon is saying is spot on. Now that they've got everybody in place, now they've got to start winning. To get people to come out, to get people to support the team, they've got to at least see progress towards winning. That's why it's critical for, say, Willie Fritz to take a step forward with that offense and get people to want to come to the games. There's only so many 13-10 games you can come see in this day and age with all these entertainment options, especially in New Orleans.
Oh, no doubt.
So they've got to get that fixed, and they've got to start getting a higher caliber player to compete in the conference. And it'll be interesting to see how Mike Dunleavy and that experiment plays out. I'm really eager to see and talk to him about what's it like for him now. This is a former NBA coach. traveling. I'm sure he's not staying in the same level
Recruiting.
hotel. Yeah. They're going to have to recruit internationally. I think he knows that. They've already started that. But I'm interested to see how that plays out. That's going to be a fascinating experiment.
You know, you have to give for a second to UNO and their basketball team. I want to give Coach Sless a lot of credit for the schedule that he is playing.
It's amazing.
It really, honestly, I don't think, go back to even Tim Floyd. I don't think we saw a schedule like we're seeing right now out of the University of New Orleans.
No, they've not dodged anybody, and that was a big win they had against Tulane. It's always a big crosstown rivalry. And look, Schlesinger is a guy that gets overlooked in this sports scene, the sports landscape here, but he's done a great job. I've always felt like he gets the most out of his team. He finds these guys that fit their system, and they're competitive in their conference. And look, they did a lot of great stuff during the flooding. I know they went down in Baton Rouge and helped gut homes. They're a jewel, and people should support his program out there because I think they're doing it the right way.
And he's really a really, really good coach. He really is. I think he's underrated. I don't think
time.
New Orleans realizes how good of a coach he is.
Look, it happens all the time at UNO.
Yeah.
I remember when Buzz Williams was there.
Right,
People no one
right.
knew Buzz Williams. Now he's at Marquette going to an
Yes.
NCAA tournament. It happens. Get out to the arena and support that program, and I think you'll see his teams play hard and they play smart.
Right, and they're an athletic team this year as well.
Yeah.
Very athletic, exciting.
And that's the way that conference is, and he knows it, and he can find those guys throughout the Gulf Coast.
No doubt. Pelicans at the time of our taping, 10 games under 500, 10-20. You know, I've talked on the radio show that if they gave the type of effort every single night that they did against Golden State in a loss, this team would be close to 500 right now. But with that said, I think they're playing better basketball right now than maybe they did earlier in the season. Now, they've gotten some guys back from injury. They're getting maybe a little bit more acclimated to playing with each other. But the competition has been a little bit stiffer, with the exception of Philadelphia that they took on the other night. What are your thoughts on the Pelicans so far in terms of how they played recently?
Well, getting Holiday and Tyreek Evans back, what it's done is extended their bench now, and we're seeing that when they go to their second unit. And it happened the other night with Philadelphia. The second unit carried them, 42 points in the second quarter, and AD was on the bench for almost all of that.
Yes.
It was mainly bench players. That's where I've seen the improvement. I think you know what you're getting with Holiday. You know what you're going to get with Evans. He's working his way into it. But can they develop somebody else in this group? Can Buddy Hield come on? He looks like he's starting to get more comfortable.
More relaxed.
Yeah, he's not lighting it up, but he's getting 12, 13 points a night. That's what they need from him right now, to open up things for AD, and he's just playing at such a remarkable level right now. No one really has anybody in the league that can match up with him. He's such a difficult matchup. But I agree with you. I think the effort has been critical, and I think that's what Alvin Gentry wants to see right now. They've got enough pieces to where they can throw these guys out like a Terrence Jones and a Langston Galloway and an Itwan Moore, and now they got Cunningham back. Somebody's going to be hot on a given night. Can kind of carry them. Galloway's shown that. Now can they start winning these games because they've been in it? Can they win now? Can they get over the hump?
Right. I think maybe the biggest disappointment on the team has been the play of the center position. When AD doesn't have to man that center position. You got two guys that you reinvested in Amir Sheik and Alexis Agenza. They still don't seem like they fit this system, and both guys, honestly, are kind of hit and miss. Jones has been a guy that has come in and has really helped on the inside, especially when they go small with AD at the center position, which I think is going to be his natural position as he kind of still continues to grow in the NBA game.
Yeah, it makes you wonder why you re-up with both of them. I could understand one of them for matchups purposes, but the league is going to this small ball kind of, more versatile lineups, and let's face it, the Pelicans finish every game with the small ball lineup. That's their best lineup. So I don't understand why you would have both those guys on the team unless you thought maybe they'd be an asset you could trade down the road. But with the way the league's going, I don't know how many people are going to be interested in those guys, especially the contracts they have. But I agree with you. Terrence Jones has been something of a find. He fits alongside AD very well and gives them a lot of versatility. That's the thing they've got. They've got versatility. The guy that hasn't really gotten on track at all is Solomon Hill.
Yes.
This was the big free agent acquisition, and he's a great guy. If you deal with him in the locker room, nobody wants to do well better than he does, and he just hasn't fit in yet. He hasn't gotten comfortable. I don't know what it is. Is he trying too hard to live up to the contract?
Right.
But he's maintained great leadership ability, and he's got a great attitude. You just hope that the light clicks on for him at some point, because that would be a big addition, because the small forward position remains a huge weakness for them when they play another team.
And with Hill, I always thought of him more of a defensive player, okay?
Right.
They wanted to bring him in talking about because, it is his last stop at Indiana, toward the end, he started hitting threes. I thought that was an anomaly. I think what you're going to get out of him is a guy that's going to be a grinder for you. If you're anticipating him being a guy that's going to be your second or third leading scorer, I think that's fool's gold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, he's another one of those guys. They've got a bunch of players that are kind of like the same level, don't
yes.
they? They've got about 8 or 9 of them, and then you've got AD and Drew Holiday, and so they just need one more element to that mix. And I think that's what I think originally Alvin Gentry thought they would have, and this offseason they elected to let Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson go.
Right.
They lost some of that outside shooting. That's been a weakness until of late with Galloway kind of turning it on. But that's something I think, look, this roster's still in flux.
Yes.
With some of these players coming back, I could see them making a move because they've got some parts now that I think will be attractive to other teams.
I think they have to. I think
I
think they've got to be a player coming up on the trading deadline. You hope that honestly Evans is healthy, that he may be attractive with an expiring contract. Right. I mean, there are some guys on there that I think they have to. They're going to have to try to do something to upgrade the roster.
With an eye toward even next year.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? Clearing the deck,
yes.
getting ready for free agency, and getting ready to make one more push with AD.
Right.
And if they don't do it, there could be some other people leading AD.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. How hot is the seat for Dell Demps?
Well, it's got to be hot. Look, I think more than anything else, and we'll see what happens in January if this team starts winning, are people going to be coming to the games? If there's anything that will gain the attention of Tom Benson, it's going to be nobody showing up to the games, no butts in the seats, and that's hitting the bottom line. And we all know that's what motivates Tom Benson above all things, in addition to winning.
With that said, when you look at now the expansion of the salary cap, again, more money for AD, but also more money to be able to utilize to bring in free agents. The question is, are you putting that nucleus together that you can woo a free agent to New Orleans when all the money's equal with the teams in the league that may be vying for that free agent?
What's more than likely going to have to happen is they're going to have to overpay.
Right.
They have to overpay somebody to come here because it's not an attractive situation. They're no longer a buzz team, a team that is ascending in some eyes, and they're going to be competing with teams, frankly, like the Philadelphia 76ers or the Timberwolves that are younger than them that have much more upside. The Lakers are a good example. And that's what I think the challenge is for this organization. How do they get that next step? Where do they take the next step? How do they attract people to New Orleans without giving another Omer Asik deal?
Right. Good to see Anthony Davis say that he's still committed to New Orleans and committed to his team. That could be lip service, but at least right now he seems committed to New Orleans.
He's been remarkable throughout this. And I wrote a column a couple weeks ago about his leadership skills. I mean, sometimes we forget. I mean, he's still in his early 20s. And he's not complained. He's taken a lot of bumps and bruises. He certainly could complain because his teammates haven't helped him some nights. But he's taken on the role of franchise player as good as you could expect for a guy that young. And
playing at an MVP level as well.
Yeah, big time.
No doubt. Jeff Duncan, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
That's Jeff Duncan of the New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com. They're the columnist over there. Thanks so much for tuning in. There's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. Also statewide on Pelican Sports Television. That is Friday night at 9 p.m. You can catch me on the radio, 990 a.m. WGSO. That's weekdays, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. You can catch us on the TuneIn Radio app, which is a free download for your smartphone or tablet. And you can also download the podcast, listen live at ericasher.com. All the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports can be seen at ericasher.com as well. Special thanks to our guest, Jeff Duncan, also to the WLAE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Kenny Juneau, Naila Jones, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for watching this edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to all. And we'll see you back here for the New Year's edition of Inside New Orleans Sports next Thursday night.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.